Grand. So I'm delighted to welcome Professor Kate Ames from CQUniversity in Australia, who will be presenting her talk entitled Designing for Agency and Presence, Lessons Learned from a Case in Innovation. So it's over to you, Kate, and thanks a million for coming along to do the talk.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm delighted to have got the time zone right. So we did try this earlier this year, but I got the time zone wrong. So I managed to get it right. So really, really happy to be here, and hopefully this will be of some interest. I do have a bit of a death by PowerPoint, so I will just share my screen now. And so I am the Director of Learning Design and Innovation here at Central Queensland University. So my role is in really building educated capability. I've got quite a large team of 40 to 50 people, and we look after really academic curriculum build, supporting academic capacity at CQUniversity. And this really is it feels a little bit indulgent, because I'll reflect on my personal journey and how I got to this position, really, I suppose, through some of this particular case in innovation. So, and we can talk at the end and you can unpack that. But first, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which I'm presenting here in Australia. I am based on Yugambeh or Mununjali country here south of Brisbane in southeast Queensland, and that is the view from my back deck. So, and I'm very grateful to have the privilege to live here. So just a little bit about me for those who don't know me. So I am, I think, and all of us aren't we, educators. We're all multifaceted. We come from various different things influence us. And so I'm a mum of two teenagers now. I am a passionate farmer gardener on my little hobby farm. I've been an academic for 25 plus years. I'm also a lieutenant colonel or military officer part-time in the Army, and I currently have a training role where I have a leadership role in training for public affairs officers in the Australian Army. My brother is a quadruple amputee, so I have had, I think, what I would call a life jolt as a result of his journey, and so that made me sort of really sit and reflect on a lot of the things that I was doing. And I also have some pet sheep. So you'll see in the bottom my pet sheep Milo, who is, if you follow me on Twitter, he appears every now and then when he harasses me while I'm studying. So so that's a little bit about me. I've been an educator. I've had a parallel journey as a military officer and as an educator for the last 20 literally 25 years, and so that's informed some of my journey as well. So just a little bit of a background with regard to my approach to this conversation is really from an autoethnographic perspective. And one of the things I like about being a reflective practitioner, and particularly from that also autoethnography perspective, is it allows you to look at things differently, and what I think is most appropriate for my journey is it can begin with an epiphany, and certainly that happened in my case, which has drawn me into the innovation space in my career. So before I go on, the stuff that I'm talking about today with regard to the particular course we innovated for could not have been done without the team that I built or was supported to build, and they do an amazing job, still work with me now at Central Queensland University, and anything I say that is my success is also their success, so I just need to acknowledge that before I move on. So so in the beginning, I have been teaching in distance education since the mid-1990s. And so my life as a distance educator started when I started with CQUniversity, which is a regionally based university in Australia. We've got 24 campuses currently, but we've always had a distributed network, and we've always had distance students. And I was employed on the basis of a background as I was a journalist, and I had been a magazine editor, and I was employed to do graphic design, desktop publishing. and teach that by distance. And so in those days, we would get these little yellow folders with CDs, and we would, you know, put them into the CD in the laptop computer and, you know, mark them and send them back. And the only communication that we had with the student was in a teleconference, maybe once a term, and in the feedback that we gave to the student. So it was very much that correspondence model, and some of you may have been involved with that. And I did that for roughly, you know, I was teaching in that for years and years and years without real question. And the only thing that impacted on your teaching were technology upgrades, or, you know, we can't afford the teleconferencing anymore, or we don't think it's working, students aren't using it anymore. So there were slight changes to practice, and then you would have your on-campus component. And the two of those were always quite mixed. So from there, just have to excuse my dog, who might just insert himself into the picture in a minute. And so from there, I became a student. So I had come in from like a clinical background, I suppose, as a journalist and educator. You know, done my master's, but I didn't have a teaching qualification, and so I did my teaching qualification. So I have these two epiphany moments that in my career. One was both of them were as a student. One was doing a learning and teaching graduate certificate, and the other was doing a permaculture unit by distance. And I'm just going to unpack those a little bit, because it was as a student that I really started to challenge the practice at the time. And this was, you know, a good decade ago, of what it was like for me as a student to have control of my own learning. So I've got here on the left, you know, agency is obviously, you know, there's agentic engagement, which is quite well respected and well understood at the moment within a, you know, K-12 sector. You know, I'm a cultural sociologist, so looking at agency from a sociological perspective, I think it is something that informs my thinking as I'm going through this story, I suppose. So the first story is about me being stuck in an airport when I was trying to submit an assignment, and I was hunting for Wi-Fi. Now, Australia at the time, and still arguably doesn't have the world's best internet, at the time had really, really limited internet. And I had really, really fixed due dates as a distance student trying to upload my final assignment. And I remember thinking, here I was an experienced student. I think this was my 4th degree. I was a full-time working adult. And here I was hunting through Adelaide Airport in Australia, trying to find a place where I could upload this assignment, because there was an absolute no extension policy. If you didn't get it in, you didn't get it. And the course had been a little bit piecemeal, you know, so it was almost experiential learning. And I was going, I really don't like this. I like this. I like this. I don't like this. And this, it almost broke me. I managed to get on the plane, blood pressure through the roof, thinking, oh my God, what am I doing? I passed and so on. But it was why? The question was why? So the second story is a permaculture course that I was doing through our university, and I was an external student studying it, and I felt like I had found my tribe. You know, this was the thing that was like, I'd done all of this sociology PhD, but here I was talking about building berms and trees and sustainability and recycling and all that sort of stuff, and I was like, oh, I found my tribe. So no one was more engaged with me. And without wanting to critique really at all the academics involved, because they were really, really passionate. But what I experienced at that point is they were talking about a residential school, and the residential school was really for people over in, you know, South Australia. It was going to be easy for some people to get to. But as the mother of 2 young children who had a husband who worked shift work, I had no capacity to get there. Now, it wasn't a compulsory residential school. It was optional. But nonetheless, the conversation in the classroom it made me feel like an outsider. And then I felt excluded from that. And it was, you know, and then they all went to the residential school and everybody was all, you know, chummy with one another. And even though here I had found my tribe and I was really passionate about this area, I still felt like I was othered in the classroom. And so those were my 2 epiphany moments, generally speaking, about education. And they then helped inform, I think, the way that I then started to design my courses, trying to be very much from an inclusive background, and where I have always designed for the fringes. If you can design for the most difficult or the most excluded student and make that person central, then it's going to be easy and everyone should feel included. So those were my two epiphany moments, generally speaking, as an educator. And at the bottom there, you know, this concept of agency, you know, how do you make a student feel heard and in control at an individual level in something that is actually quite fluid? You know, when you've got 400 students in a classroom, particularly if you've got, you know, students online, on campus, etc. So that's just setting the scene for, I suppose, the overall approach. So from there, I had an opportunity in 2017, where I had, by that stage, created a track record in my distance education. I was known as a bit of a, you know, I suppose, an innovator. I was always surfing the wave of how to do stuff. You know, technology was always changing. And because I was teaching in courses such as, you know, desktop publishing, where every term there was a new kind of tech that I had to upgrade. You know, I went from PageMaker to, you know, Quark Express to whatever. So you're always having to upgrade. And so I just happened to have a conversation with our Vice Chancellor at the time, who was looking at an innovative disruption in an online MBA, you know, because why not? He had it, and I won't go into the background, but nonetheless, it was a strategic initiative, and I was given the opportunity to sort of take a leadership role in that. And it was very much on the side, even though it was strategically supported, it wasn't necessarily a popular idea within the university. It was a bit contentious. It was going to be really quite out there. And so, and I thought, why not? You know, I was at a stage in my career where I thought, you know, I'll give it a bit of a crack. And so the concept at the time, and this is really a bit of the, you know, getting into the specific case of, you know, what we did and how we did it, was to be Australia's most accessible and flexible MBA that exceeds student expectations in quality, feedback, support, and experience. So the boundaries, or the, you know, left and right of arc, I suppose, were that it had to be tertiary accredited. It could only be online. There couldn't be any due dates. People had to be able to submit when they wanted to. It needed to be low cost, and it needed to be highly structured, in that there was no choice, no electives. It just needed to be sort of a generalist degree in leadership, and that appealed to me. On my military background, I thought, yep, I can do this. This is and the MBA market in Australia is, well, globally, is extremely saturated. So the question is, well, you know, where can you fit? And this was before everybody went online, I have to say. So this was, people were sort of going online, but this was going to be new and disruptive. And so one of the key reasons why I took this on at the very outset was because some people said, oh my God, don't touch it, it's poison chalice, you know, you can't do it, it's not going to work. But from an equity principle, if you want to do an MBA in Australia and arguably around the world, they're really expensive. And in a country like ours, you know, flying from somewhere like Ayers Rock to Brisbane for a residential school, or for a weekend get together, or even for a get together at the end of term, is extraordinarily expensive. So, and that appealed to me, because not everybody wants to change the world. Maybe people just want to make their business better. Maybe they want to engage with their local community, particularly in regional parts of this country. There are people who are very, very, very embedded in their community. They're really, really well connected. They really want to study. They, you know, but the idea of, I mean, flying from Longreach in Australia to, for the weekend, for a weekend residential school would be to 2,000, you know, which is what, £800. You know, so it's a lot of money just to come on top of your study fees. So that appealed to me, that idea of, if everybody's better at their own backyard, and this is the permaculture thing coming in as well, if we're all better in our own backyards, then the world generally is a better place. So let's concentrate on that. Martina, I can't see any hands or whatever. So if anybody's like, you know, eyes are glaring over, or if there's any hands up, then just let me know. So
okay.
Yeah. So from there, with that first principle, the second principle then became, well, how do we make it student-centered? And so from my experience, you know, this is rough, but it's, you know, there's lots of research into sort of, you know, student types, I suppose. but this was from my experience as a distance educator over this period of time. There were these 5 types of students. So you had the independent student who was learner to content in online. They got their little study package. They went off and they studied it. They put in their submission. They did well. They got their feedback. It was all good. They moved on. Then you have your codependent learner teacher, who was the person who would ring you up or send you emails, or and they need your guidance a little bit more. That's the expensive model, I suppose, or that's where the expense lies in that support. Then you have the confused student who's motivated. So and I'll show you what this looks like in a minute. So someone who's really, really motivated, but really disorganized. So they become a bit of not a liability, I don't like using that word, but they become a workload for an academic, because the academic is always trying to kind of orient the student to where you need to be moving forward. Particularly, this is online. The ghost student is the student who enrolls, just never appears. They just don't touch down. You don't appear them. They're on your system. You have to report on them, but they don't, I call them a ghost student. And then you've got this life's happening, but motivated. So they're the students who, not necessarily as regular, but they are really motivated. So, and we had experienced those in our online learning, just kind of hadn't really had a chance to really think about designing specifically for them. And in this particular environment, okay, let's look at what these look like. So in a normal course, this is what these students look like. So, we are actually having to think about these student contexts, the student journey, what their required learning is, what their collective experience is, and it's all framed by the regulatory requirements. And in Australia, we've got very clear requirements as to onboarding of students, student expectations, and the UK and internationally is no different. So there's always these regulatory boundaries. And so off to the right, you can see, so you've got all these students, you've got the happy students, you've got your ghost students, you've got your students who are a little bit confused. And right off to the right here is the motivated student, just completely independent, just doing their own thing. And so when we came to design this course, we sort of, okay, what are we going to focus on? And let's focus on the independent student who's comfortable with learner content, but we also need to think about the life's happening, but they're still motivated. And so what is the difference between the two? The difference between the two is the level, again, of the level of agency and independence that they want and need in their course, and the assumptions we make about their learning. So those were the focus points. So let's look at what it would take to talk about those, to support those students. And then the third one is accreditation. So when we start, everybody said, oh, is it like a MOOC? It must be like a MOOC. And no, it's not like a MOOC. And the reason it wasn't like a MOOC is at the time, it wasn't massive. It wasn't open. It was, we called it the TASBOC, tertiary accredited self-paced online course. And so the reason it was so unique, and still is unique, although more courses are starting to move this way, is that it was entirely flexible. You could decide you wanted to do it today and you would be enrolled by Monday or Tuesday. You didn't have to wait for a session. We had devised a way to enroll you. Now that had a number of issues in terms of designing that we then had to think about. So, but it was that orientation to people going, oh, it's like a MOOC. Yeah, no, it isn't like a MOOC. It's not, MOOCs are, were at the time very much session-based. They were reliant on an academic or team of academics over a period of time who would engage in whatever way the MOOC was designed to engage. You get 23,000 students that will be communicating with one another on discussion forums, etc. There's still a little bit of that. Well, there's a lot of that now, but obviously the MOOC environment has changed and developed extraordinarily over the last decade, but particularly the last few years. So these were the driving concerns. So the driving concerns that we had were that it had to cater for diverse students while maintaining standards. We had to design for higher levels of independence and technical literacy. We needed to facilitate a learning community, but also deliver content. The concern, one of the driving things that I had was that students remember the way we make them feel. So we wanted to create this really supportive learning community in such a way that people didn't feel excluded or included, that was almost like agnostic as to the way that they were going to engage. So I didn't want them feeling guilty if they weren't logging in to the discussion board 3 times a week, or I didn't want them feeling guilty if they couldn't come to a residential school. So, okay, let's not do the residential schools. The feedback became particularly important, and because it became a key contact initially as positive conversations. So what we found really interesting was orienting many of our academic staff into really having a positive conversation with the student, rather than this is a standard that we're marking against. So it had to become quite a relational thing that happened. And the focus ultimately then became on the outcome, not on the standard of entry. So most of the MBAs, or a lot of the MBAs, are very much executive. You need 10 to 15 years experience, which is great, but okay, what about the person who's had 5 years experience of running their own business and actually really wants to get into and would they benefit from this? Absolutely. So it just meant that we needed to really think about how we were going to scaffold and do all of the support. So the final point there became we needed to design for and accept rather than fight student agency. We needed to really challenge our assumptions about what students wanted and how they would behave. And there are an awful lot of assumptions. So some example questions that we kind of worked through were teamwork. Everyone says, oh, you need to do teamwork. Absolutely. We all know that. But why do you need to work with a group of people you don't know? Why? Is it a good thing? Maybe. And maybe it is a good thing to go and work with people you don't know. Maybe you learn stuff through that process, but do you necessarily need to do it all the time in every course to actually get the outcome for the course? And in fact, maybe even reflecting or asking students to reflect on the teamwork of the students' teams that they already work with, because chances are they've already got conflict, they've already got all of the different personalities in the team, and maybe they can think more deeply in that team. So that was a bit of a shift change for some of the academics working who'd already always just, oh, well, you just need to do teamwork, or teamwork is good. Yeah, okay, but let's think differently about why. What are we doing? So due dates, why do we have due dates? And so there's good reasons often for due dates, but let's just not accept that we need them. Assessment, in the absence of deadlines, how are we going to manage assessment across, we have 11 units across, at the time we had no students, but how are we going to manage it over 2,000 students submitting at any time across the marking team? So that was a, big question. Why do we need to hear from students if they don't want to talk to us? If they're quite independent and learning and they're motivated, why do we need to hear from them? How do we know what's happening offline, and what do we need to know what's happening offline, and what assumptions are we making about them? And then what technology is needed to support that independent learning? And one of the questions, because we keep hearing personalization, and I'll talk to about that a bit more about that in a minute, is it reliant on codependence? Are we actually wanting our students to be codependent on us because we feel the need to see them to actually know that they're learning? And the answer may be yes, but I think the point of this was asking those questions to really think through the assumptions that we make, and a lot of the assumptions that some of the research that we do is based on. So these were just some of the examples of the many, many, many questions, noting we started in 2017 and it's been a 5-year journey. So, in this disruption, as we move forward, these systems kept coming up. Aside from the people, technology, it was, for us, it was the systems. How do you, when your university has been used to a term-based model, suddenly enroll people at any time, whenever? Well, we can't do that. So we needed to work through the systems. How do we manage assignments when our normal term-based is Moodle, learning management system, upgrade, so lots and lots of change. But systems was probably and arguably the main thing. So we ended up coming up with a new model for our university. It was student driven. We became a community. We changed the way that we supported our courses. We learned that we needed synchronous opportunities, even though it was online, but we needed to do that in a way that people didn't feel that they were missing out if they didn't go to the synchronous opportunities. So it was very much an opt-in. We went for course level, so we don't do unit or subject level management, it's all course level. We had to go through a new sort of workload approach, and then multiple policy challenges. So over the last 5 years, as we've bedded it down, every time a policy comes up for a review, we actually go through it and go, well, does this actually cater for what we've called hyperflexible courses? So this is what it looks like if you're a student in the MBA leadership. you know, this is what you would look at if you're enrolled in all of these units. So, and you can go and tap into whatever. So, and so students were really surprised when they started. It was really high quality. It was really low cost. It was just quite a different model. The current state at the moment, you know, 1,000, well, actually around 1,200 flowers in bloom. So we currently have about 1,200 students in it. It's 5 years old. We just won the best lecturer or most, I can't remember the name, but one of our course manager was recognised at the MBA Graduate Management Awards, and one of our graduates was actually also nominated in Australia. So the progression is very slow. We find that the average progression is about 3 times. So a normal student will take 12 weeks, or in a normal semester, our students might take, you know, any time from 3 months to 6 months. What we're finding, I think, you know, things like people are reviewing their work more, they're taking time to submit. We've got a submission phobia question happening about, you know, are people afraid to submit? So there's lots of stuff that's going on. I am a student in a hyperflexible degree, but not this one. I'm a student in our Master of Educational Neuroscience. And so I'm experiencing this as a student. And so, and I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. So, so I thought I would be my own guinea pig. And so what do we think we've learned? Obviously, systems and processes are critical to experience. Focus on the build for ad hoc usage, and that's the agency piece. So it's not for everybody. Not everybody can cope, nor do they want this kind of level of independence, and nor do they do not want that level of agency. You know, they're really very happy to be told what to do, to be given clear guidelines and boundaries. This is for, I think, what I would call a student like me. And I was lucky. I was able to create a course for a student like me because I kind of had the keys to the car in a way, because I was a student. I'm a really experienced student. I've studied multiple occasions. I'm really, really busy. Do I necessarily want to learn from other people? No. Am I thinking about what I'm learning every single day? In my Master of Educational Neuroscience, I can tell you that every single day I think and probably act on what I'm learning in my course. But so my lack of engagement with other students or the academic doesn't mean I'm not thinking about it and not actually actively reflecting on it, which I find really interesting. And when I read about, oh, well, students aren't engaged because they're not logging in, or they're not working in groups, or I've got no proof that the student is actually learning something. Oh, okay, let's have a real conversation about that. So what we also found was that individuals stood out from the crowd more than we thought. You know, we thought that, well, when you've got 1,200 students, how do you know who's who? But because we've stripped away a lot of the administration and it's course level, course team, it's taught in a different way, we really can all talk about, Martina's done it, you know, how's Martina going, or how's Michael going, or, you know, how's Ruth going? So ad hoc groups emerged. So it's almost like it's gone back to the mid-1990s when we were first teaching, where we had these remote study groups where people would actually study up, create little local study groups. And so that has happened, which we hadn't seen happen for the past decade, because it's not supported. There's more revision, and success, we found, builds acceptance across the institution. So where people were really skeptical, and we're talking really, really, really skeptical when we started, we now have, I think, around 22 hyperflexible courses, and it's, you know, thousands of students are enrolled. So what have been the challenges with regard to this? Challenges have been really in the assumptions about how students learn and want to learn in an environment like this. And we tend to beat ourselves up as academics about the way a student engages with our courses. And we've really had to flip our thinking. And I've become, I think, you know, anyone watching this recording, or anyone who's Michael works with us at CQU, you know, may say, no, you don't. But I've become pretty good at saying, look, we just need to wait and let's not make a hurried decision about this. Let's just be comfortable with the uncertainty surrounding the data. You know, we know that students aren't submitting, and so everyone's going, oh my God, we're panicking about progress, but they do have an ultimate due date to complete. And I'm the classic where there's no way I'm not going to submit that assignment. Just because you're not seeing me in completing within a set period of time doesn't mean I'm not going to complete. So, you know, so the challenges really have been about the assumptions and working through those assumptions and just trying to do something that really is quite new. And where we've been really lucky with our institution has been the strategic support of the initiative. You know, it would have been, I don't know how it would have gone if it had been sort of like a skunk works over here, but because it was very much okay, let's commit to this. There was support, even though that support was really on the outer until that success became really evident, and then people started to buy into it and feel comfortable with such a different model. And so there's, you know, been some learning there. So some of the key lessons, really the main one has been about student behaviour. You know, we have had almost zero plagiarism or cheating, which you'd think these students online, no due dates. You know, we've got, we're pretty comfortable with the very rigorous process that we have, but what we are finding is that the students aren't necessarily under such stress to complete within a particular time. They're going over their work, they're able to talk to their mentors, so that pressure off, we don't know, is that part of why we're not doing it. A lot of the understanding about pedagogy and curriculum is based on very traditional models. So, you know, so that it's difficult to actually go into the research to actually then unpack, you know, okay, well, where's agency? So agentic engagement, most of the literature is in K-12. There is almost no literature on agency in higher ed, generally speaking, you know. So in the way that in my head, I'm wanting to understand it. And so the acceptance of this is very much being informed by that experience and worldview. So what is the key current tension here out of all of this that I think is something that we really need to, and it is a tension for institutions, I think, and those of us who teach, is at the moment there's a very much within our institutions this talk about personalisation. And, you know, the data set, the data driven, you know, let's see how students are working and we'll personalise their journey. And there is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. And that's a really admirable goal. The problem is that some of the work that's being done on personalisation, I think, is quite assumption based. And what we've learned is that it's really, really difficult to make assumptions. And this agency piece is the piece. It's why we're having conversations of, we set a lecture and no one turned up, because actually students now have the choice and the ability to go somewhere else. And then people are getting upset about that. Why? Why are we getting upset about it? Oh, because we think that they'll learn better if they come to lectures. Why do we think that? You know, where is the data? Maybe they do. You know, maybe our failure rates are higher because they're not coming to lectures, but maybe the failure rate is actually because, you know, they've had COVID, lockdown, multiple stresses at work, lost job, you know. So there is research out there that says that the impact of life on students actually is far more influential generally than what's happening in the classroom. And yet we still we still try and hold ourselves up to these really, really high standards based on assumptions of how students are going to work and what they're expecting of us that, you know, aren't necessarily good for us, you know, and you know, this idea of how students learn and how they learn best. You know, we talk about Vygotsky. Is it still relevant? Yes, maybe, but maybe that we need to be starting to think about, you know, other real key theories, which is why I think, you know, looking at, you know, agency theory, for example, is kind of helping me unpack some of this stuff. So, so in summary, yeah, I think I'm going okay for time. In summary, I suppose where I was really lucky, I was able to draw on my experience, and I had experience both as a staff member as a student, and I just happened to be in distance ed because of where I was and location. And then I was just given the opportunity to be involved in creating something new and quite different. And so I feel very grateful and very blessed that I had that opportunity and that it actually has ended up working. And it could have gone any way. We could have just had no students. They could have hated it. You know, so I've just been very lucky. And designing for agency has been absolutely part of that process. informed by, this is back to the autoethnographic piece, informed by those epiphany moments and my own personal experience as a teacher and as a student, that, you know, was making me challenge some assumptions that I could feel were being presented to me, particularly as a student. And that the challenging, that's been the most difficult part. My personal view is that student agency is actually the most current pressing issue in higher ed, and that is how they learn, why they learn. You know, you can't, that stock standard, you know, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So, you know, how do we design to keep them, to give them what they need in the way that they need it without breaking us? Because institutions are, you know, have to be fiscally responsible. We've got workload models. We've got all of these mass education, you know, contexts we need to consider, and yet the students are coming in and they're wanting to engage with us in very specific ways. The challenge with the personalization piece is, I think that still drives assumptions, particularly if it's data driven, because a lot of data at the moment is also about that online engagement. Okay, well, that's why you're making an assumption, because you haven't seen me log into my course for the last 6 weeks, which I haven't done because I've been on, you know, multiple external jobs for the last 6 weeks. Does that mean I'm not listening? Does it mean I'm not learning? And does that mean I'm not engaging with my coursework? Absolutely not, because I'm thinking about, you know, the amygdala and brain and responses to stress, and, you know, quiz reflections, and there's repetition. Yep, repetition is something, you know, that's good. It's good for your brain, or etc. So I'm thinking about it every day, and it's consolidating, solidifying, because I know I've got this assignment that I have to do, which is a presentation, and every day I'm kind of thinking, oh yeah, that will help me do X, Y, Z. But the data will tell you that I'm not engaged. And so I think that's one of the things that is a really pressing current issue for us as educators. And that's it. So thanks for listening. Thanks for the opportunity to talk and share. And I will stop sharing. And oh my God, there's a lot of people there. I could only see Martina, Michael, and Michael. So hello. Yeah.